Independent Senator Bernie Sanders and Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez continue to draw thousands of people to their rallies across the country. In Idaho, over 12,000 people attended the duo's Monday stop in the Ruby Red State. The lawmakers also made 2 stops in California yesterday with more than 30,000 people in attendance altogether.
Now, why are you going to see Bernie going to Idaho? And I'll give you one simple answer. It's because you matter.
We are at a crossroads. We can either have extreme wealth inequality with the toxic division and corruption that it requires to continue and survive, or we can have a fair economy for all working people, along with the democracy and freedoms that uphold it. Oligarchy or democracy. But we cannot have both.
This guy cannot take criticism. He can dish it out all right, but he can't take it. And I say to Mr. Trump, if you can't take criticism, get out of the political process. This is a democracy.
Joining us now, former Democratic Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, and actually also adding to your list of creds, former U.S. Ambassador to Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I say that because I want to ask you if the tariffs and this tour that we're witnessing with AOC and Bernie Sanders, is there any potential opportunity for Democrats here?
Well, sure. And God bless those guys for doing it. You're seeing the energy. You know, the Democratic Party needs to get up. You need to get off the mat, and then you need to get our own house in order, and then we need to get back in this fight. And those guys are leading, and God bless them. And there's a bunch of sources of energy for that, but they come together into something pretty powerful. And when you're putting together, you know, my in-laws are from Iowa. When you're putting together, you know, farmers in Iowa, and you're putting together, you know, the Harvard faculty, something's going on. And I,
right.
And I think that the key is that people like that are the ones that provide a space for people to find their voice, find their power. And this whole thing is going to turn around when we start believing we can do something about it again. And I'm proud of those guys for doing it. And the crowds tell the story.
They do.
Those crowds are hard to get when you're not a presidential candidate, when you're not, you know, some rock star. I mean, those guys are pulling thousands of people out. That's telling you something.
Yeah, it sure is, Joe.
Yeah, you know, Mr. Ambassador, it's so fascinating. Of course, you had a leadership role, a big leadership role in the Democratic Party. You understand there are many parts of the Democratic Party. Bernie and AOC represent one very important part of the base that drives so many people out to the polls. But there's also, you know, I hear from Democrats all the time, man, we've got to figure out how to win middle America back again. It's interesting them choosing Idaho for that message. I'm wondering, we won't look backwards. We'll look forward. What do the Democrats need to do to keep their base energized, as we're seeing with Senator Sanders and AOC, and at the same time get those moderate voters that are so important to get in Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin?
Right. Well, you're seeing one half of that equation, I think, with what Alex and Bernie are doing out there, and that's important. I think the other half of it, when I say we need to get up, but we also need to get our own house in order, is you got to have something you can offer. And we can't just be depending on the president's unpopularity, because that's not the same as them saying, well, I wish I had voted for you guys. There's a lot of opposition to this president, and then that same voter will say, well, but I wouldn't have changed my vote, or I'm not ready to vote for you. And that's the part where we need to fill this void with reasonableness and common sense and some good ideas that speak to those folks who just want something better, but who know this is wrong. And that's the hard work of rebuilding a national majority. Now, I think the progressives have one argument for that. I think moderates have another one. But somewhere in the middle there is some substance and some things we're going to do for people that they look at and say, yeah, that makes sense. And then more than that, you're going to have to start winning the culture, because the fact is the politics is downstream of the culture. And if all we're doing is talking to other politically engaged people, you're not getting to 51. And we're going to be talking to each other, telling each other we're right. You know, and stopping at 48%. And that means you got to get out into these communities that have found a home in the Trump movement, but who aren't really involved in politics, and you need to pull some of them back. And that is the hard work that folks in frontline districts often do. And those folks tend to be more problem solvers, more practical. So I think the substance drives that when you start offering solutions. But I think it starts, man, with giving people their voices back. And that's why I give Bernie and AOC a lot of credit for going out there and doing that work, and more of that, please. We want more of that.
You know, David French, it's so fascinating. You look back to 2016, and there were a lot of people that voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary that jumped over to Donald Trump. There's so many examples of that happening, and we've given them all here before. I won't repeat it again. But a lot of Americans who are populists, not ideological. They don't really care about the Republican Party. They really don't care about the Democratic Party. And so much of what we heard AOC and Bernie Sanders say when it comes to economics, you also hear some people in the MAGA base, including Steve Bannon at times, saying the same thing. I guess the question is, how do Democrats get that energy and regain the middle of the country?
Well, it's pretty clear that there's a segment of American voters that aren't, say, all in with Donald Trump. They're all in against the establishment. They're all in against an establishment that they feel like has failed them. Well, guess who is the establishment now? I mean, MAGA has nowhere to run if it's looking to assign responsibility for the outcomes of this administration. It controls the House. It controls the Senate. It controls the presidency. 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices have been nominated by Republican presidents. This is the very definition of establishment. So, yeah, absolutely, Trump has this base that will never run from him ever. We know that at this point. But there are people who are frustrated when things just don't work. And, you know, earlier we were talking about the difference between incompetence and malice. And malice is horrible, but incompetence may be the thing that actually does the Trump movement in.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, it's interesting to think about how there's an opportunity to build a coalition here that is so much more ambitious than the one that was even possible in this last election. I think about welcoming people who maybe want to admit, to paraphrase Arrested Development, that they made a huge, tiny mistake. I don't wish to shame those people. I want them to consider the broad coalition you're describing. But when it comes to how to offer them something affirmative, as opposed to merely riding the pendulum of incumbency and anti-incumbency, which is what David's talking about, is there an obvious strategy here when it comes to how to say this is not merely not Trump, it's something actually more ambitious?
Yeah, 100%. And we've seen it in the past, but you're right to focus on the future. I mean, look, I want a Bobby Kennedy, the original, the OG Bobby Kennedy Democratic Party that can go into Appalachia like those guys are going out to red states and talk to people who are struggling and not sound like a weirdo and be able to sound like their neighbor, be able to talk like their friend or the guy they grew up with. And yet can also say, hey, you know, no, principles matter. We're going to stand up for the thing called the Constitution. And so, yeah, you may think due process doesn't apply to these folks, but here's why it matters. And I do think combining working class people and people who are looking for a place in the American dream is always been the project of the Democratic Party at our best. And we can do that, and we can energize young people again, and we can talk about the future. And I think this Trump stuff is all a bunch of junk food. It's going to leave people feeling lousy and tired, and it's not going to work. And when that space opens up, it's our job to fill it. And it's our job to fill it with something healthy and something good and something they know is better. I mean, ultimately, I want to be a party of hope and of positive change, while these guys are finding their power in anger and in hatred and in resentment. You know, that can get you pretty far. But we can go farther if we go together, and that's always been the Democrats at our best.
Former Congressman and former U.S. Ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Sean Patrick Maloney. Thanks for coming on this morning. Great to see you.
Thanks.
And